Split zone duo, Alex. Sorry to disappoint. It's just me and you today.
Yeah, no guests, but that's okay. We haven't really been setting out any expectations that we would have guests, so no big deal.
No, of course not. Absolutely, definitely not any cadence. Punchy show today. I am exhausted. I need to take a nap. All right. So Saturday, they're playing the Red River rivalry showdown shootout. Your mileage may vary on what name you call it. Instead of talking about the two teams in that game because they are of little note in the broader college football ecosystem, I would love to talk about the teams that just beat those two teams, starting with your Iowa State Cyclones.
Absolutely. Iowa State beats Oklahoma last weekend 37-30. This game, of course, was played in Ames, where you never want to go for a night game if you are a highly ranked team. You might win, but you're going to come out bloody, and in Oklahoma's case, you're not even going to win. Iowa State benefited pretty significantly in this game from Oklahoma just not being able to tackle. And so I don't want to overstate how good Iowa State's offense was. A lot of this was not much more complicated than Oklahoma not tackling at all. But I think there are some good things here that make me wonder if Iowa State might really be putting something together even beyond the increasingly high but still existing ceiling that they have shown under Matt Campbell. I think the big asset here is Brock Purdy, the quarterback, and I have some questions about him, but I think that his play extending ability is like a real asset. Like it's like prime Ben Roethlisberger style play extending ability.
That is, the yins are in there.
He is really, really good at getting himself out of trouble.
I don't know about that.
And that is important when you're playing behind an Iowa State offensive line that so far has not really let him be very clean. I think that the stat that kind of says it all is that he has dropped back 91 times this season. He has been pressured 24 times on those 90-some dropbacks. That's a lot, but he's only been sacked twice because he tends to get away from trouble and chuck the ball downfield. He's got a great tight end in Charlie Kohler, and they can move the ball, I think, against good Big 12 defenses. My big question is, at some point, Richard, is Iowa State going to ask him to – are they going to be asking him to do too much when he's kind of constantly running for his life and needing to make something out of plays where his pocket collapses pretty quickly?
I mean, maybe. The only team that I think the only team that they can't really do that against is Oklahoma State, right?
Probably. Because Oklahoma State has a serious defense now because
actually has
imagine if you could imagine anything weirder than that in 2020, I can't. But yeah.
Well, Baylor may now. Lord knows what it is Baylor did on Saturday against West Virginia. I don't know if we're calling that football or not, but I do think that Oklahoma State may be the issue here. And I had I was doing a Big 12 podcast right before the season, and I basically asked, I was like, so is Brock Purdy good, or do we know yet?
We might still not know.
We might still not know.
I think he is really good at keeping himself from getting sacked, and that's a pretty significant asset when you're in a league where if you just chuck the ball downfield, there's a good chance someone is going to have gotten free. And we saw this against Oklahoma very much. He had, I think, on Iowa State's first drive or second drive of the game, but certainly their first scoring drive, he gets flushed. Oklahoma brings a measly little four-man rush. He gets flushed. He runs to his right, and he throws downfield to a receiver who had nobody within 20 yards of him. And it would have been a touchdown if the receiver didn't fall after he caught it. So if you can just not take negative plays, can you keep an offense like this on track to the point that you can score a lot of points? Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think that I think so. I think you're right. I should say. I think you're right. With a team like Iowa State who tries to – so I'm looking at their sort of breakdown here. So when he's under pressure, he's fine. But being under pressure and being blitzed are a different story. And that's why how is Iowa State allowing Brock Purdy or when does Brock Purdy have to run for his life? Is Iowa State unable to block just 4 rushers, or is it a global struggle against everybody, and when they're bringing pressure and when they aren't? I don't know. When he's blitzed, the grades on that offense really drop off a cliff.
They do.
When he's blitzed and when he's under pressure in general, they are not awesome. So that's I don't know, because obviously when you bring pressure, you bring in variance. If you're not able to handle it, throwing interceptions, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. It felt like Oklahoma, for all of its defense's tackling flaws, was able to get pretty close to home with just 4 guys fairly often. And in spite of that, Oklahoma's secondary and linebackers were just so bad that it didn't matter. And I'm going to be really curious to see how that manifests when they get into the slightly meatier part of the schedule. It's hard to say that there's a lot of meat in any Big 12 schedule right now, and I don't think they're going to see that this week when they host Texas Tech, which has a very Oklahoma-esque defense. But Oklahoma State, after a bye, is going to show them that. Baylor is 2 weeks after that. Kansas State is 2 weeks after that. Maybe Texas and West Virginia, depending on how things go for those teams at the end of the year. They are going to stress test Iowa State's ability to protect, whether it's 4 or 5 or 6 rushing. And I'm not to disappoint with we don't know the answer on this podcast, but I think that is what's going to determine what the ceiling is. And I think that for now, if we're just talking about what are the possibilities are that Iowa State get through the rest of the schedule with maybe one more loss, maybe. They could get through a year with 2 losses, and I don't know how many wins that would be, because it would depend on how many games get canceled, which is the ultimate variable in this season. But this could be, if the answers to these questions are favorable for them, their best season in many, many years. Yeah,
agree. Elsewhere to the Red River beaters, TCU beat Texas last week. TCU, my question about TCU, I think, skews fairly existential. And it's, what exactly do you do here with TCU? It's sort of been the question that I've been asking about TCU for quite some time. I am unclear about the identity of this program, more or less, every year since the Trevon Boykin era. And we are in the twilight of the Gary Patterson era. It has been a productive era. He has, in many ways, revolutionized the way defense is played across college football. The last, 3 years, offense has not really been what it needed to be. No. And on Saturday against Texas, they did this weird thing where they tried to let Texas back in the game, but Texas never took the game back from them. And so TCU just sort of outlasted them and ended up winning the game. But, we talk about TCU's place in this college football world and the fact that the Rose Bowl was quite long ago, and Andy Dalton's not starting anymore in the NFL. It's as you get further and further away from your past success, you have to figure something out, and you have to assume an identity. I think some of this is the Auburn quandary that I have in my head that I talked about, I think on the Sunday show, the Whip Around. I don't get Auburn. I'm confused by Auburn. No, I talked about this on Thinking Out Loud Monday nights, SEC Network, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 Central. You have a brilliant coach who made his hay one side of the ball doing one thing very, very well. You're not really doing that well, even though TCU's defense is playing pretty well this season so far. But you're not really doing that thing well globally anymore. So then what? How do you evolve? How do you progress? That's sort of the identity question in my head that I'm thinking about when I think about TCU, when I think about Auburn, when I think out loud.
I think the identity shift is it can even get very granular in that the things that we used to think about a Gary Patterson defense, what do you think of first? Do you think of a 4-2-5, right? He was an early adopter of that model of defense, and
it's not just TCU. It's not just the 4-2-5. I think people, the way Gary Patterson, the way their defense is called is insane. They call the front, and then they call one half of the coverage, and then they call the other half of the coverage. It's just really weird. They have a read side and a away side. Continue.
I was going to say that, and it's a crucial point, and it actually goes to the thing that I was going to say next, which is that the best players and the strength of TCU's defense, I think we associate it with a lot of the really good defensive linemen and linebackers they've had over the years. this almost feels like a defense that was built from the secondary down now, with a couple of really good safeties who are kind of like the focal point of what they do, in that they're pretty good. And I think that this is something that they've been pretty good at for a couple of years now. But they've been particularly good at it this year, which is just like clamping down on the intermediate passing game. That is where Big 12 teams kind of make their hay now. And I do wonder how that's going to go when Trevon Moehrig and their other safety, whose name eludes me at the moment, move on. And if the entire thing is like, they don't really have much of a team-wide identity right now, other than they've got like maybe the best safety duo in the entire country. And so what is it when those guys are gone? I mean, it really becomes tough to figure out, but not to take too existential of a tone about a team that just beat Texas again, as they have done very often.
Again, 7-2 against Texas in the last 9.
Yep. And we're talking about this team like they seem a little rudderless, but
I think
they could go to the Big 12 title game.
Sure. And that's what I'm saying is this is the time when they are in a position right now where they can sort of write a new story for the program or whatever it is you want to say. I talk about what is TCU's identity. Well, they can sort of gain one back if they play well, and it's still defense. Okay, you've broken serve in a conference that is offense. I just had this question about TCU. I wonder about TCU. So far, so good as far as how the defense is playing. But look, the week one against Iowa State, they didn't really have a chance in that game when you look at sort of the advanced metrics. Like the post-game win expectancy was like 18% in that game. Like it's not,
Yeah, they weren't as good as they hit. We talked about this at the time, but they hit a Hail Mary at the very end of the game that made it a 3-point game. It wasn't that close. Right. But they did have a chance earlier in the fourth quarter.
Was the game you weren't thrilled about?
No, that was a game that some of us had vested interest go against us due to an extra point decision there. But yeah, we've seen two very different TCUs in 2 weeks of action.
But I think when we talk about what is good defense, what is good defense in the Big 12, it's not about holding teams to nothing anymore. It's about, there's no shutouts anymore. It's about sort of breaking serve. And if you're going to really hang your hat on defense, I think you change the way you think about defense when you think about TCU, right? Like they have some sort of rock fights, like 28. I think the last elite-ish TCU defense is probably 2018, right?
Probably so. I mean, it certainly wasn't 2019 if you watch that team. And 2018 as the current defense does. 2018 had a number of pretty highly drafted future NFL guys who went out the next year or two.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Monitoring.
Yeah, we are monitoring. One thing that we will monitor about them, and I think we might learn a little bit more this upcoming weekend. They're at home against Kansas State. Skylar Thompson, Kansas State's quarterback, hurt his arm against Texas Tech last week. No fracture there, according to Chris Klieman, so I'm not sure if he's going to play in that game or not. But if he's not playing, you would kind of like to see TCU's defense
assert themselves.
Right. Like you would like to see a number below 30. I mean, it's Kansas State. That's a team that even when they're playing well, you can probably keep them below 30 just because of their style of play. You wouldn't mind seeing TCU go and win like a 27-21 game or something. If that is the case, we'll see if it is. But again, despite the kind of uncertainty about their future, uncertainty could be good, could be bad, and we'll see. So normally, as we've mentioned at the top of this show, the biggest game of this weekend would be Texas-Oklahoma. Iowa State and TCU have made sure that Red River is not even nearly the biggest game of this weekend. I want to talk about the one that is. That would be Saturday Night Football this week. The Miami Hurricanes in Death Valley against Clemson. Miami, what you got? I guess that's kind of what we're operatively looking for. Richard, what do you think Miami's got, and how much of a threat do they pose to the Clemson Tigers this weekend?
So I really wonder if this is the time when someone can make hay again and make Trevor Lawrence uncomfortable back there. Doesn't mean Trevor Lawrence isn't going to play well. By the way, make sure that's noted. I'm not saying Trevor Lawrence isn't going to play well when he's uncomfortable. I'm saying he could be made uncomfortable in this game by Miami's defensive line. I think Clemson Twitter was a little perturbed with the way Clemson played against Virginia. They sort of played around with their food a little bit. It was like a 10-point game late in the third quarter, right? Before they pulled away there.
UVA gave Clemson's version of adversity.
A game.
Yeah.
And I've often said this about Clemson. Clemson is interesting to me because Clemson doesn't really make many bones about the fact that they don't really care until like November. Not they don't care, but they're not fully operational, fully weaponized until November. They're sort of like the Patriots in that way.
They are, and their schedule gives them no reason a lot of the time, and particularly this year. I mean, they don't play Notre Dame until November 7th.
Sure.
They don't
unless
play
you have
Virginia
a good
Tech until December this year.
You know, unless Florida State is good and Florida State's operative, which haven't been in 4 or 5 years.
Nope.
There's not really much that scares in the beginning of the season. But we saw last year against UNC, Clemson can sort of play with their food during a game that they are against a team that they are demonstrably better. And Trevor Lawrence did not look good early in the season last season. His version of not looking good, which is still the version 120 college football teams would take, bending over backwards. But I say that to say, like, if there is a confluence of Clemson being not operational yet fully, and Miami maybe being good to more than just good, there could be a close score here. I think that the spread's like 2 touchdowns, so I don't think Vegas really thinks that. So I don't know. I with Miami. The other thing with the Clemson offensive line thing that I sort of wanted to bring up, it's the weirdest thing about Clemson's program. They don't really churn out NFL offensive linemen.
No,
it
not
is
really.
very odd. I think there's 4 NFL offensive linemen right now in the league from Dabo era Clemson. It is really one of the most confusing things about that program.
It is interesting, yeah. They've got one, their left tackle right now, Jackson Carman, who was the recruit who they got out of Ohio, the 5-star, like shocking Urban Meyer's Ohio State. And I think it was the recruit that he was the recruit who led to that discussion that I think Ohio State was up in arms because Dabo had reportedly told Jackson Carman that he thought Urban Meyer was going to retire soon. And then a lot of people in Ohio got very up in arms about that. I wonder how that worked out. But yeah, aside from Jackson Carman, I don't think that their offensive line is really loaded with. At least it's not loaded with the kind of players who, on paper, are the same level of recruit that Clemson now has up and down the roster, and maybe that shows a bit. The interior of their line had some issues against UVA. Particularly between like the center and the left guard.
I also do think
Matt Bockhorst, yeah.
They also picked Virginia also picked on the fact that I don't think in pass blocking Clemson's running backs are elite. Sure. I think Georgia had a similar situation last week against Auburn, even though obviously we know how that game went. So I don't know. I think Miami could do some things to sort of mess up the protection and get at Clemson. On offense for Miami, they're not going to be facing a defense that is structurally broken on one side of the field, allowing them to get 21 points in like 4 plays. That's not going to happen. So this is the Derek King test. I worry if they're going to try to do speed and space stuff in the short, quick passing game against Clemson. Not exactly the greatest way to make a living on Saturday night.
One point that is interesting that Miami fans, I think, are all too familiar with is how Miami looks after they play Florida State. That used to, of course, mean that Florida State would beat them and break them. they would be, and this was a constant feature of the Al Golden era, where they would come in looking pretty good. In 2013, probably the starkest example of this, they were 7-0. They played Florida State. It was bad, as it was for whoever FSU played in 2013, and then Miami finishes 9-4. And something to that effect happened often over the years. Do you see it being a little different now, given the quarterback situation at Miami, or do you think Miami fans will understandably continue to be concerned about this until they see otherwise?
Well, I think they're better coached. I really do think they're just better coached right now. I think you saw it in the Louisville game. They were well coached for that game. They didn't take the candy. They didn't take the motion and the shifts all that often on defense. They weren't really bamboozled. They didn't give up a ton of chunk plays. They were a well-coached, sound football team in that game. I think that is something that can bear out over the course of this season if, let's say, Saturday night goes particularly poorly for Miami. I don't really expect the bottom to drop out of this team, but the next 2-3 weeks are not exactly kind to Miami. They go Clemson, Pitt, Virginia. If they are not ready to strap it up and play Pitt a week after Clemson, they could get beat. And that is when you say, oh boy, here we're spiraling. And then you have NC State. I'm reading it right now. NC State, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech. So if you're gonna spiral, then you go play Virginia Tech. Then maybe Georgia Tech is on a heater by that point in the season. And that's the team that Georgia Tech gets. And then you play North Carolina, and maybe North Carolina has figured it out by December. That's when I talk about will one loss beat Miami 7 more times?
If it doesn't, if one loss does not beat Miami, and we're going to try pretty hard not to get into too much you as back territory on this particular episode of this show, but if they don't let Clemson beat them more than once, it's worth noting that they should, more than 5 times out of 10 or more than 10 times out of 20, win every other game on their schedule as we look at it right now. You go Pitt and UVA at home, at NC State, at Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech at home, at Wake, UNC at home, which that might be kind of the biggest toss-up of the bunch, maybe save for Virginia Tech. But the point is that it could be a special year. It's still on the table that it could be a special year. And I think that if they can avoid just getting whooped,
waylaid, yeah.
I mean, they're 14-point dogs. If they lose this game by 21, hey, you're playing Clemson. It depends on how it looks. It depends on how it looks. It depends on how it looks.
I mean, because a 21-point margin means Kirk Herbstreit's boys may be in the game.
It could perhaps mean that they were getting beat by 28 at the beginning of the third quarter, and then Clemson did its Clemson thing and brought in ninth to 10th string players. Or it could mean that they hung close and it was a 7-point game early in the fourth and things got a little out of hand.
Basically what it was Saturday.
Piled it on.
It could be basically what it was Saturday.
It could basically be that. But if Miami were to pull off an upset here, that would very much be kind of a we have arrived again kind of moment for them. There is one other team in the Power 5 that has that kind of opportunity on the table this week, so we will move there. That is number 14 Tennessee.
Before, haven't they?
We have been here before. Number 14 Tennessee visiting number 3 Georgia between the hedges.
I've been talking myself into this all week.
I've been talking myself into Tennessee with a few drinks for a few months now, so I'm excited to be here.
I've been talking myself into Tennessee winning this game. Legitimately winning this game.
Wow, drink it in.
You want to talk about personal growth? That's personal growth there.
Why? Why do you think Tennessee is intriguing to you? And should we note the line in this game?
14, 12? 12.
Ish, right?
Something like that.
It's a little more than a touchdown, and we'll get it as we talk because that's the way we prepare for this
show.
So,
the weather's going to be awful, first and foremost. There is a literal hurricane bearing down on the south. So the weather's going to be tough. It's going to be a mucky, dirty, nasty game. What I saw from Georgia, I don't know if Georgia can do that again against Tennessee. Georgia went 7 yards per play on first down on Saturday night against Auburn. That's not ahead of schedule. That's not just ahead of schedule. That's like the sticks are in the sticks are in Atlanta and you're in Athens. Like, that is unbelievably ahead of the chains.
Yep.
I don't know if they're going to do that again. Conversely, Tennessee, similar. If you get behind the chains against Georgia, you're gonna get whipped. Last year they played Georgia pretty well through, I believe, 3 quarters, with 2.5 quarters, like 14-10.
I mean, it wasn't,
and then Georgia sort of just
bad
ran
for
away
a lot
from
of the day. Yeah, I mean they've done this a couple times with them recently, where they've hung for a minute before things have.
I think Tennessee. Boy, this is gonna. I think Tennessee can physically hang with Georgia. For
Tennessee's offensive line
in the trenches
is like varsity.
Shout out Pancake Pantry. Tennessee's Twitter has been calling the 8 lineman formation the Pancake Pantry. I'm told that's a nod to a local Tennessee establishment in Gatlinburg and Nashville. So holler. But I think they can physically hang in the trenches with Georgia. I don't know if Georgia is going to physically dominate them like they did Auburn. I just, seeing that happen would be odd to me. But the other thing is, we talk about quarterbacks and we talk about comfortability. Stetson Bennett was way too comfortable on Saturday night against Auburn. He's comfortable the whole game. You have to make him uncomfortable if you're Tennessee. That means I want to see Henry To'oTo'o screaming off the edge on some blitzes. I'm talking heat that pocket up, get that guy moving, and then you see what happens when he's throwing off-platform throws, when he's not comfortable. That is what I want to see from Georgia. If Georgia handles business in this game, really handles business, I think you got something here moving forward for Georgia. But if Georgia really struggles and this becomes a South Carolina redux from last year, then how exactly has Georgia progressed if they can't win this type of game, this ugly, dirty, mucky, nasty game, which is what it was last year against Carolina?
Well, if that happens, then I think you just go into a mode where you are praying for JT Daniels to be your Messiah and solve everything. Okay. And that is not a good place to be with him coming off an injury.
I'm also trying to figure out if Jarrett Garantano is. I think you see it with Jarrett Garantano, and then you don't. It's the Kellen Mond thing. Jarrett Garantano throws a nice deep ball. I mean, he had some nice balls against Mizzou, who is bad. But then also, you see him late on a mesh down by the goal line. Now, they converted on 4th and 1, but I do not want to see Tennessee with 4th and anything, really. I mean, you convert on 3rd down. No. Convert on 3rd down. And they didn't do that against – they were like 1 of 12 on 3rd down against South Carolina.
It depends on if it's short yardage, right?
Say again?
If it's short yardage, the Tennessee Pancake Pantry could be pretty useful. Because, look, Tennessee's offensive line
that scares me. Is what scares me.
Being someone who covered – I spent a couple of years with our dear friend Bud Elliott covering recruiting pretty closely and going to camps and, watching the top of the offensive line recruiting rankings every year. Tennessee, if I'm counting this right, among their 6 highest snap counts so far this season on offensive line, you have Trey Smith, who's I think either the best or second best line recruit in the country in his year. Brandon Kennedy, their center, is an Alabama transfer, blue chip recruit. Wanye Morris was a 5-star. Darnell Wright was a 5-star, I think the first 5-star in the history of the great state of West Virginia. And Cade Mays was a 5-star who went to Georgia and transferred from Georgia and was just made eligible last week and played his first game.
He broke the flow chart, didn't he?
I believe
your transfer flow. Flow chart?
Yep, he broke our transfer flow chart, and that he is a non-QB who had a high-profile transfer case and was granted immediate eligibility. So congrats to him. But Tennessee has enough beef on that offensive line that I don't know what they can't do in 4th and 2, 3rd and 2. If they can just stay close to on schedule, Tennessee, they might be able to just run the ball and get enough first downs to win the game. And I don't even know how it's kind of an embarrassment of riches in terms of recruiting talent on Tennessee's offensive line. This is I would wager the most talented in the way that we would analytically assess talent, just in terms of the recruiting haul and how these guys were regarded. It's got to be the best in the country. I mean, it's majority 5-star. I mean, like,
Look, I'm very excited for this game. I think both of these teams are gonna hashtag establish it. And I don't know, it's gonna be that sort of slobber knocky type game, and I think for that reason, it's gonna be a lot of fun. I am excited for Tennessee, Georgia, and I have maybe talked myself into thinking Tennessee can win this game legitimately.
I'm not sure that I'm there on they can win, but I'm definitely there on they can ruin Georgia's day and leave a very upset Georgia fan base, kind of no matter what the result is.
Is that almost, not for Tennessee fans, but for the neutral, is that almost better? Like,
maybe.
Georgia fans continually just being plagued by this offense. Like, how long is this offense thing going to hang around, right? How long is this going to hang around? Georgia, because Georgia plays Alabama on the 17th.
That is coming up. Are you serious? A week from this?
Yeah. So if the offense doesn't look cogent against Tennessee, then you got the Alabama team coming up that we know is going to score at least some semblance of points. Yep. Maybe not 50 against Georgia, but they're going to score some semblance of points, and Georgia will have to keep up with them. Yeah. So if it doesn't look good on Saturday, agita, major agita.
Yeah, not going to be a fun week for Georgia if Tennessee does what we both think they can do, which is at least make it very hard on them. Okay, those are some pretty big ones this weekend. I want to talk about a game next as we move along that was a very big game just a few short years ago. In fact, a few years ago, this was the AAC championship game. Now it is not, because Temple has not played a game yet, and Navy is...
God, they haven't?
Temple has yet to play a game. They literally have not suited up unless I've missed something significant. They're playing Navy this weekend.
Dude, Temple hasn't played a game? I may fire hard on Temple.
Well, the thing is, we don't really know what they are. I mean,
that's fine, but coming out the week one against a triple option?
Yeah.
You said you're down. Okay, you said you're down on the triple option.
I'm a little. We talked about in Discord earlier. I'm a little down on the triple option, just sort of philosophically, because we're just thinking a lot these days about the health of the human body for various reasons, and it just seems like, man,
can't imagine.
Like a lot of crashing and banging and a lot of cut blocking at poor linebackers' knees just makes me feel kind of sad. But Temple is going to attempt to deal with Navy's triple option, and attempt to deal with Navy's triple option is a task that right now seems a little easier than...
See, I pretty fundamentally disagree. I think week one for Temple, week one against the triple option, you cannot rep it, you cannot practice it fully.
Sure.
Because just to take behind the curtain, teams don't like to cut block their own teams. No. Nobody likes to do it, which makes it sort of hard to rep. I know what we've seen from Navy, which is that they have physically been whipped a couple times this season.
Multiple times, yes.
But
we'll see. It's an intriguing game in that we don't know a ton about Temple, but we sort of are getting, like, I would say it's safe to say at this point, very bad vibes about Navy. It seems...
I'm calling it vested interest on Navy.
All right, Richard is going ahead, and he's going to bet against what kind of what I'm going to go with for the rest of the segment when I talk about some of Navy's issues. Richard is committed right now. He has just said it, so he has no choice to pull on Temple as a 3.5 point road favorite.
3.5 point road favorite. I think Navy can win this game outright.
Okay. Well, if you want to do that, then of course, if you want to do that, if you want to pull Navy, which is what you want to do, you can get Navy on the money line at about plus 145 right now.
Might do it.
But yeah, you'd be betting against Temple, at 3.5 as a favorite. The reason that Temple is a road favorite in this game is that Navy has just really displayed some issues. Even if we give them somewhat of a pass for what happened in week 1, or maybe it was week 0 against BYU, you can give them a little bit of a pass because they weren't practicing tackling. But 55-3 at home is still 55-3 at home.
That's tough.
A couple weeks later, they were at Tulane. They were down 24-0 in that game, and they mounted an improbable comeback to win, which kind of created a vibe that they might be coming out of it. But then they went to Air Force last week, Richard.
And really got it put to them.
Like Richard, they lost 40-7, and it was a true 40-7. There were 10 Air Force points off turnovers, but it was a dominating game. Where Air Force controlled the ball for like 34 minutes. The yardage was 410 to 240.
The 7-point underdog Air Force Falcons?
I believe Air Force was a dog in that game, and
because we fired it. It was a vested interest last week, and
went ahead
boy,
and
howdy,
crushed.
did it cash.
And Navy hates Air Force, right, Richard? Like this doesn't get a lot, like nearly as much pub as Army, Navy.
Yeah. So
it's not like Navy wasn't up for this game. They hate Air Force in like a very visceral
so
way.
This is to bring people behind the curtain of the service academies. Army and Navy have this sort of like regal, like honor and respect and stuff like that rivalry between them, and both of them hate Air Force. Like hate Air Force. Air Force is sort of new kids on the block as far as the Commander-in-Chief's trophy goes.
As far as the military in general.
As far as the military in general. Kind of mouthy. Also, there are some people who are not super thrilled with the way Air Force recruits, and I will leave it at that. But yes, there is some animus towards Air Force from Navy especially, and I think that is why that result, I think you're right, Alex, stands out, because they got shellacked.
In a game that you would think, like, you're coming off a 24-point comeback to win, you maybe have your season kind of back on track. You have had 2 weeks to prepare. Navy has been playing on a game every other week cadence up until now, and it was just bad, man. Like this was an annihilation. They gave up 7 yards a carry, and they got 2.5. And Navy's defense, we should note, to that 7 yards a carry is like the big problem here. Navy's defense is graded by Pro Football Focus as by far the worst run defense that has been involved in an FBS game this year by like double-digit points against anybody else. Horrendously bad at pretty much every element of defense so far. And obviously Ken Niumatalolo is an offensive guy by trade, but you just don't expect to see Navy look unprepared. And they have looked unprepared in all 3 of their games so far. They got it together around halftime in the middle game against Tulane.
Yeah, they spotted Tulane, 24?
They spotted them 24, and then they got together. But they've played 3 games, and they have come out, and for a large stretch of each of those 3 games, and really for the entire game against BYU, just not looked like they were even there. And that is unusual. And I'm almost inclined.
See, this is the thing. I'm almost inclined to throw out the BYU thing because what I think about BYU, but then Air Force kicked the shit.
That's the Air Force thing. The Air Force thing is the most problematic because we both think. I mean, we've talked about this. This is the editorial line. BYU is going undefeated, and will beat some teams.
Depending on Boise, because they added Boise.
If BYU does not go undefeated, then the benefit of this is that podcasts do not really index on search engines, so no one's going to come back and say anything about it.
But we also said it before they added those 2 games.
We did. So
BYU listens to the podcast.
We're covered on this, on BYU going undefeated. It's an all upside, no risk play for us to say that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, the Air Force thing is just, there's not much more to say about it other than that we will see how they look against a complete unknown in Temple this week. And there is good news that East Carolina is on the horizon in 2 weeks, and that is
a get-right game.
That is a get-right game. But I've got bad news after that. Navy is currently slated, if we're reading SP Plus correctly, to be a dog in every other game they play this year, with one being basically a toss-up against USF at USF in November. So, like, there's still a possibility of things being pretty grim here, and if Richard, I hope for Navy's sake that you are right that Temple will not be prepared for the triple option. We will see. We just mentioned ECU a second ago as Navy's kind of get-right game. ECU is a good team to work out some things against. And
I was about to. You said ECU is a good team. All right.
They're a good team to work out things against. Georgia State had this opportunity last weekend. They won 49-29 against the Pirates. That moved Georgia State to 1-1. That would have been 2-0 if not for blowing a pretty sizable lead to Louisiana, which would have been a real quality win for the Panthers.
And they've, because they are not playing this week, again, they will retain the Louisiana for yet another week?
Yes, correct.
It's decreed.
Louisiana was going to have a game this week against Coastal Carolina, which we were very much looking forward to. We'll talk about those teams another time. Off because of Hurricane Delta. Wishing all the best to anyone who might be listening to this show in the projected path of that storm. Hope you're doing the best you can be. On Georgia State, we want to talk about them because we like startup programs. We here at Split Zone Duo are a startup program.
Moon Crew LLC.
And at Moon Crew LLC. Georgia State did not exist a decade ago. I mean, they came into existence basically 1 decade ago. They joined FBS. They didn't exist as a football program, I should say. They joined FBS in 2013, and they've kind of had a lot of middles and downs. I wouldn't say ups and downs because they haven't gotten that high, but they've been bowl eligible a few times. They've gone like 7-6-ish, or they've been like a 0-2 win team. But they're always interesting to internet people like me because I look at a school in Atlanta in an FBS conference, and I'm like, well, they could be good. Richard, is that just the Rice fallacy with Houston coming into play for me? Am I missing something, or
I think
do we have some upside here?
So Georgia State is fundamentally different from Miami, from USC, from Rice, from Stanford. What is the fundamental difference, Alex?
Well, they play in the Sun Belt. And also they're a commuter school. And also they have
that is it.
Okay, yes.
The difference there is that there's a lot of Georgia State graduates. There's a lot of just regular folks that went to Georgia State. I think that is shout out to the homies, Robbie Callan, Harry Lyles Jr., my friend Aaron Hartley.
Absolutely. Go Panthers.
She started there. There is a lot of just regular folks that went to Georgia State. And when we talk about that makes them different even from Georgia Tech. I mean, they are a city school that can quicker than maybe I shouldn't say that. But I think Georgia State has an appeal to the regular Atlantan that perhaps Georgia Tech does not, which is less sort of ivory tower about them. Now, I know that that's a stretch because Georgia State's a Sun Belt team or whatever, but the rivalry they have with Georgia Southern is serious. Like those schools do not like each other. Those programs do not like each other. And that's just sort of a fun thing.
That's
about
an acronym fight.
But Georgia State, they strap it up in Turner Field, which we love that. Former Olympic venue Turner Field. But they're pretty good this year compared to what. For a program that's been in fourth year,
I think this might be like 7 or 8 for them in FBS, but of relevance, and the reason
fourth year of Sean Elliott,
under Sean Elliott, the reason that we are talking about them is not because they beat East Carolina, but because if you just look at the way that they stack up and the way that they played pretty well against Louisiana, this seems like a team that is probably ticketed for its best year ever of football. Not just FBS. They played a few years in FCS. Every game on their schedule for the rest of the season is very winnable for them, with the possible exception of a visit to App State. Doesn't mean they'll get all of them, but right now they're 1-1. And I think there's a pretty good chance, and we'll see how many games they play. I think at this moment they are slated to have a 9-game season. Like 6-3, 7-2 is in play for them.
They played Louisiana pretty close.
Yeah, they played probably the best team in the Sun Belt to a 3-point loss where they had a chance to win the game.
Sure. Now they sort of pulled a rabbit out of a hat there, but it was close, and I'll say that. You were looking at PFF, and you think PFF really loves Georgia State's defense. I was looking at some other data, and a certain William Connolly's numbers do not like Georgia State. And I texted Dear William before the podcast. He has not texted me back. So if anybody's listening to this, here's
text
what we're
Bill
gonna
for us and tell him to call Richard.
Don't text Bill. Tweet Bill. Just everybody who's listening to this podcast, tweet Bill. Why do your numbers hate Georgia State's defense? And hopefully, don't say we sent you. Just carpet bomb his inbox.
And be classy about it. Be classy about it.
Be nice about it, but carpet bomb his inbox. Ask him why his numbers hate Georgia State's defense, and hopefully we'll get a straight answer and lift the shroud of secrecy for our Panthers.
Yeah, but we're excited about Georgia State because we on this show like it when teams get to heights they have never gotten to before, and that feels like a thing that could happen with Georgia State this year, a situation that we would like to monitor. Richard, I know we want to take some questions. Is it podcast business time in the middle, would you say?
Yeah, we can do a little podcast
business. I will say off the top that a number of these questions that we're going to answer are from the Moon Crew LLC Discord.
Which is, Alex?
Which is a community platform, which you can join via our Patreon page for as little as $3 a month at patreon.com/mooncrew. And talk with us and with over 1,000 other people about whatever you want. And it's not like there's actually 1,000 people in the room at all times. Usually across the entire channel, there's maybe 300 some people online, spread out among a lot of different rooms, talking about a lot of different things. I am currently looking in the Canimals room, which is a photos of pets and food/drink room, and it seems that there is a very nice discussion going on about hot sauces, hot soups, stew, étoffe, oatmeal, pasta,
etouffee,
bechamel, béarnaise, hollandaise. There's a little
Christ.
taxonomy of food going on, talking about ways to enrich dishes right now. So
there is a split zone duo room where you can hang out with anybody who listens to the show and likes to talk about it. My sort of under the radar favorite room is skincare and self-care. Right now they're talking about tarot card readings. But we did a pretty good skincare chat when we sort of opened the room. I was trying to figure out makeup for the show, honestly, and learned a few things about some things. Learned about serums, getting the skincare routine right. Micellar water after you do a makeup wipe, before you do the cleanser and the night cream is key. And so that's been part of my skincare routine over the last couple weeks. But learn a lot about football, a lot about life. That's Discord. We have a good time. SP Sellers in Discord asks, can you discuss the difference between Gus and Jimbo? They both made their career on generational players like Cam and Jameis. Why was Jimbo worth that sort of money to the Aggies? What am I not seeing in Jimbo? For me, I think A&M I think you got to give it a second. And I know it's hard to say give it a second when he's being paid that kind of money. I get it. But I do think that he gets quarterback, some wide receivers in there. Let it breathe a little bit. Let's see if they can take the next step over the back half of this season. Obviously they play Florida on Saturday. If they can get Florida, that's a pretty big chip given the way Florida's playing. The way Florida is tackling, it can be done. The way Florida is playing defense on the back end, it can be done. It's not a fait accompli that Florida's going to win that game. Texas A&M did not play as well as even the score indicated against Alabama, and the score did not indicate they played that well against Alabama. They lucked into 14 points in that game. So I think that's sort of the thing where you look at, man, they are so far away, Alabama. And yes, Alabama's head and shoulders over everybody most of the time. But to see it as stark as it was on Saturday, I think as an A&M fan, I understand why an A&M fan would be super not happy right now. I think a fundamental difference in the two, though, is that, sure, they're both offensive guys, but they both made their hay in different ways offensively. Jimbo made his name, of course, with Jameis, but had been an offensive guru and a sort of quarterback whisperer or whatever for a while now. And with Kellen Mond, you see Kellen Mond's sort of like Jarek Garantano in the sense of you see it with Kellen Mond, and then 2 throws later you no longer see it, and you're like, well, what if you just did that thing you did that looked really cool?
Yeah, do that again.
Every pass instead of half of them.
Yeah, and at some point, I mean, Kellen Mond has been on campus in College Station for 3+ years, going on 4, I believe. You would like to see the quarterback guru who has done it with so many guys, do it a little better with his guy there.
But I do think some credit but I do think some patience needs to be applied to their receivers. It is that offense can be sort of tough, the learning curve wise, to pick up. Just because Jimbo is a pretty demanding coach about what he wants and the way he wants it done. So I know they have a really young receiver whose name escapes me right now, classic, who we haven't really seen a lot from right now.
Yep. And their best receiver, Jamon Osborne, left. He opted out before the year, which didn't obviously great for him, and everyone should go get paid. But I could cut Kellen Mond a little bit of slack based on that as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Another question from Steven Shaw on Twitter that I'm going to move up in the order to talk about right now because it relates to what we just talked about. He asked, how long is the realistic rebuild time for Florida State? That is, to me, possibly still relevant to the Jimbo discussion, though I want to put a grain of salt out before I keep talking that assessing exactly how much of this remains a problem is kind of hard without having a look at Florida State's players' grades, which I do not have, and I think most people do not have. Jimbo left FSU in pretty rough shape, and the roughest way in which he left them in that shape was that their academic progress report situation with the NCAA, the number of players who were going through their courses and graduating, was not up to the point where their number would be very good. This is a kind of opaque and weird system, and it's a bad system on the NCAA's part that I don't think is actually very conducive to helping quote-unquote student athletes have great college careers. But the upshot of it for Florida State is that their APR scores were not very good, and that limited, at least as Willie Taggart explained it when he was there, the kind of flexibility that they had to take risks on players who might not matriculate through their course loads the way that FSU needed to keep their APR scores up. And if you get to a certain number, then you have consequences in terms of like eligibility, bowl bans, things like that. It's not supposed to get close to like being an issue, but it did, at least for a minute at Florida State. So to answer the question, how long is the realistic rebuild time for FSU? And Richard, I'm curious if you think that I'm overthinking this issue. I think that kind of depends on what is their current situation with roster flexibility as it relates to those NCAA benchmarks. Because if Mike Norvell is kind of restrained in the kinds of chances that he can take on the recruiting trail, it gets harder to turn over your roster. This was something Taggart talked publicly about. I haven't heard Norvell say much about it.
He's had bigger fish to fry.
He's had bigger fish to fry. Very much so. And fish that he brought into the kitchen himself, some would say. So I don't really know, but I think like how long is the realistic rebuild time? It's shorter if they figured that stuff out, and if they are no longer in APR jail. If they haven't, then it could take a while.
Yeah, I sort of have the football sense of it. You I think more about the APR stuff. Do you know how long it sort of takes to rinse that from the program?
Like a couple, you've got to cycle out a couple classes, and at this point, 2 or 3 classes have come and gone. So you would think that they'd be improving there.
They're on the right side.
You would think that's what you would think.
For me, I look at the biggest thing was 2 years. I remember talking with Bud about this. It was 2 years ago. Bud was like, their offensive line at one point in that season was not Power 5 good. I think it was the loss to Syracuse. They had a couple guys go down in that game, and he was like, the depth is not there. That is not a Power 5 offensive line that they are running out there. I think James Blackman, I don't know if we'll ever know how good James Blackman was going to be, because James Blackman was stuck behind that offensive line in sort of the David Carr thing. Which is David Carr with the Texans. He was the Texans' first ever draft pick.
Yep.
Number 1 draft pick. Got sacked till kingdom come behind a bad offensive line and was never really realized his full potential. The seeing ghosts thing, so to speak. Florida State's got to figure out, I think, the offensive line and the quarterback. Maybe they have a quarterback given what happened on Saturday. Some people, a lot of Florida State people on my timeline were pretty thrilled about that. I look at the offensive line and think Alex Atkins, the offensive line coach there, came from Charlotte and Tulane, is a very, very bright football coach, can get that room turned around pretty quickly. Again, been a weird offseason. When we talk about weird off seasons, this could be a thing where it manifests itself in the weird off season manifests itself, given an offensive line trying to turn things around, unable to do so because they have not had as much time to gel as you would like, given the parameters that we are all operating under this year. Go ahead.
10 Sewer Batman asked a great question in Discord that I want to pose to you, Richard. Little preamble, but everyone's been talking about how the zone is so much more effective against Leach's air raid, as Arkansas showed the other week, and as is some conventional wisdom around the air raid, that the way to beat it is just by dropping guys into their zones. However, as a fan, according to 10 Sewer Batman in Discord, I spent plenty of time fuming about how, quote-unquote, my defense will occasionally sit back in zone and be picked apart by various anti-zone offensive concepts. Why does the Leach air raid struggle with this? Is it a matter of how Leach calls the game? Is the air raid less dependent upon window timings that exploit zone? Or is it something else entirely? Your thoughts?
Okay. Let's break this apart a couple ways. I'm trying to figure out which one I sort of want to take first. Okay. So there are a ton of adjustments and tags and that sort of stuff that happen with air raid routes. But yes, effectively it's like 3 plays. It is not simple enough to say Arkansas just played zone on Saturday. It's part of the story, or sorry, it's simple to say that Arkansas just dropped 8 on Saturday against Mississippi State to beat them. It is part of the way there, but you need to lump on more onto the they dropped 8. They dropped 8 and when timely, got pressure with 3, forcing KJ Costello off of spots, off platform throws, etc., etc. KJ Costello has to make better decisions. 2 of those picks were tough throws. For different reasons. One was just a bad throw. The other one was not a good decision. The second interception was the not good decision I'm talking about. The first one was the not good throw. So there's that. When we talk about why does Leach struggle to adjust sometimes in game, is because Leach is sort of, I would say, a little stubborn in how he sort of
a little bit, you could say,
game in game. And that may be some of what you saw on Saturday night, a lack of adjustments. The other thing that I think before all of this sort of, Mississippi State's not a great football team. And I think everybody lost that because of what happened in week 1. And I get it. But the farther we get away from that LSU game, my theory is that you're going to learn 2 things. You're going to learn that the LSU game plan was as bad as you think it was, and not executed well either. And Mississippi State's not that good.
Yeah, I think both of those things could become increasingly apparent as we go on. Richard, I want to ask you.
But the other thing is, as far as sort of like man beaters or zone beaters or whatever, because of the way the routes are in the air raid, like there's just some man beating routes, like the motion and the wheel routes and the mesh stuff that they do. Those are, I think you could say, typically more man beaters than they are zone beaters. But in the zone, for instance, we want to talk about an adjustment that the air raid has. Against zone, the crossers in mesh, the 2 crossers at 7 or 8 yards or whatever, they can just sit in the middle of the field.
The defenders can just sit.
Right. No. I'm talking about the offense.
Okay.
The receivers. The receivers, when they're running across the middle of the field and they sense a soft spot in the zone, they can just sit in that soft spot and wait for the ball. And so it doesn't look like the mesh that you think it in your head.
Sure.
Those receivers just sort of sit there. But with the Florida State, we talked about how how does the COVID offseason affect? Me and you, Alex, have talked about for weeks, how does the COVID offseason affect the Mike Leake air raid? And we talked about the fact that you got to rep it. You got to rep it and rep it and rep it and rep it and rep it. And this is the thing of when you're trying to talk about adjustments and build in answers to the questions that defenses are going to ask you, that's the thing where I'm like, okay, that may be a COVID offseason thing where you weren't able to rep it to the point that you wanted to, and so you don't have answers or as many answers to questions as you otherwise might have. That's sort of what I think about when I think about how actually COVID may have affected this Mississippi State team.
Mesh is evil to me, and maybe I'm just not smart enough to be a defensive coordinator. In fact, I know I'm not. But the thing that's so evil about it to me is that I think if I tried to cover mesh with man, it's kind of designed to ruin me because these two receivers in mesh, they cross close enough to literally slap hands. Urban Meyer has had his guys do that in game before. And you kind of create a traffic jam where your cornerbacks or your linebackers or whoever are chasing them run into each other or have to go around each other and the opening is there for the pass. That's bad. Or you could play it in zone and they could just sit there like Richard just said. I'm not sure how you stop a well-executed mesh throw, and I guess that's probably why Mike Leach has done it about 1 billion times a year for about 1 billion years, correct?
Part of the other thing that Arkansas needs a lot of credit for on Saturday is they tackled their ass off.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at some of those plays, there were screens that were happening, and it was like suction.
Yeah.
You can catch the ball, and that's cute, but we are going to make you feel it as soon as you catch the ball. And I think that like I talked about it on Sunday, 10 yak per reception against LSU, 4 against Arkansas. Arkansas was ready to play that football game on Saturday night, and they played very well, and they deserve a lot of credit for the way that they played that game against Mississippi State.
Did you have any taste of – so Barry Odom is Arkansas's defensive coordinator now. Did you have any taste of those like mid-2010s Mizzou defenses that were very good in the first glimpse of Arkansas under him?
A little bit, but I think those defenses were different because of the way they got after the passer. I mean, those Mizzou SEC East defenses rushed the passer in a way that was pretty rare.
Michael Sam, a beast.
With two guys, Coney Ely and Michael Sam.
Yep.
That was the legitimately good Mizzou team. I think the first one was the one that was actually good. The other one sort of lucked into getting to Atlanta. But yeah, no, I guess is the answer to your question.
So thank you for a very good question. Sorry if we took that on too long of a tangent, but we enjoyed it. I'm gonna read out and then quickly answer one question about Louisville, and then I want to end on some rapid fire. I know we want to get you guys out of here soon about some coaches. Some really good questions we got about coaches. David Kummer has asked on Twitter, how can I be happy about Louisville, both short term and long term? I think
it's been like 13 games. Like, I know everybody – I know we hyped them a lot during the offseason and early in the season.
Guilty as charged. And I certainly did that.
That is my fault. That is your fault. I get it. But if they're not – I think they will get better as the season goes on. They were not ready for prime time. It was clear. They are not the only team that 12 games into it were not ready for prime time.
Certainly. I would say long-term, sit back. Scott Satterfield will be good. You'll be good. Short-term, just try to be like, okay, be middle to upper half of the Atlantic. Try not to be worse than like fourth in that division if you can avoid it. And position yourselves so that in the next few years with the long-term, maybe you're good enough to get Clemson 1 year after Trevor Lawrence. It's hard, but at some point they got to lose a game, right? So,
what I do think you want to see is take care of business against Georgia Tech.
Yes.
You don't have to beat them by 30.
Yeah.
But win the game, look good doing it, move on.
Yeah, you want that. You want an authoritative showing in that game. Richard, this one's definitely for you, our Florida man on this podcast. Jordan Douglas on Twitter asks, at what point can us UCF fans start questioning Josh Heupel as the head of a program? Does not want to go full SEC here, he says, but 13-5 is not really, and 3 of those losses as a pretty heavy favorite. What are we thinking? Like, is it a little soon there to be sounding any alarms? Is it reasonable?
So be careful what you wish for in the American. when you change coaches, right? I know it wasn't voluntary for Houston, but Houston had a coaching change. Hasn't gone great since. Again, not voluntary, but
Sure.
USF had a coaching change. Hasn't gone great since. 2 coaching changes. Hasn't gone great since. The American is a conference where if you don't hit on the next guy, you can get lost
Quick.
in that league. Quick.
Yeah. Look at East Carolina. Yeah.
Cincinnati may have this happen to them in a couple years.
Yeah.
So be careful what you wish for there. Make sure Heupel's really not the guy before you really do something that you may regret.
Yep.
If you're UCF.
And to be clear, I think that was 13. I said 13-5 at the top of the question. I believe that is their record or very close to it since Mackenzie Milton's injury at the end of the 2018 season.
Okay.
A question comes in from Dr. Marco PhD on Twitter. Does Sonny Dykes ever find his way back up to a Power 5 job, or is SMU already #Power 6 enough? I actually am not sure what Sonny is interested in, but I think that he could do almost any job in Texas pretty effectively. Now, what is effective at Texas or A&M? And, it's hard to be quote-unquote good enough there, and I have no idea what makes a successful Texas coach, because if Tom Herman's not it, then I really do not know. It's hard to profile exactly how a guy's going to work in any given job. But I don't see any reason off the top of my head why he could not be fine at any of Texas Power 5 schools. I think that Texas Tech or Baylor, if they, in the next couple of years, for whatever reason, moved on from Matt Wells or Dave Aranda, though those are both 2 very young tenures, could make sense. But I do think about Sonny Dykes, he belongs in Texas. Some coaches belong in some places,
to the streets,
and that is where they should coach. Sonny Dykes should coach in Texas, where they have an unlimited supply of receivers and quarterbacks who can do what he needs them to do. Latrelli K on Twitter asks, what does the Chris Klieman extension, he got an extension the other day at Kansas State, mean for how schools may look at FCS coaches when they have vacancies, especially given Klieman's wins over Oklahoma? Richard, I have some thoughts on this, but I want yours.
That they're probably going to make the same shitty mistakes and not hire good football coaches. I mean,
yeah.
ADs like shiny things. Boosters like shiny things.
The thing that
you're not shiny in the FCS. You may be good, but you're not shiny.
It confuses me why championships are not shiny enough. Because Chris Klieman won multiple and was party to more championships at North Dakota State. I think hiring coaches from teams that win a lot is a very good idea, even if those schools are at lower levels.
Noted winning coaches.
Craig Bohl has done
come up and win.
Yes, Craig Bohl has done okay at Wyoming. I would say that Klieman has probably the early returns are a little better at Kansas State, but Lance Leipold went from Division III at Wisconsin Whitewater to the MAC and has done very well for himself at Buffalo. Brian Kelly built a legit Division II dynasty at Grand Valley State. He has worked out pretty well for multiple FBS programs. Harbaugh went FCS to Stanford. Dino Babers went FCS to the MAC and now the ACC. It is not always going to work out. I think David Bailiff at Rice, not awesome. He came from Texas State back when they were a level down, though I forget if he had an intermediate stop between them. Chuck Martin, who succeeded Kelly at some point at Grand Valley, has struggled at Miami of Ohio. There's no perfect formula, but if you are an athletic director and you are seriously considering making a coaching change, or you are in a coaching search and you do not give real consideration to lower level coaches who have won, you are not doing your job, my friend.
Yeah, I think you got it there. I think you got it there. I mean, I think you vet. And we shouldn't leave a stone unturned here. And guys at that level of football that won, I'd love to see. Maybe we actually do sort of a study on that and see what things really look like. Mm-hmm. But yeah, guys can come up and win, man. Win's a win.
Yeah, athletic directors, if you're listening, hire good coaches. It doesn't matter where they worked before. Also, athletic directors, if you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And we will talk to you on Sunday. Richard Johnson, where can the people find you other than on this podcast?
Well, we haven't done.
Oh my God!
Tasting menu. We haven't done vested interest.
Oy vey.
You're trying to get me out of here.
No, it's because our show notes had a little space between them, and I hadn't scrolled down. Forgive me, everybody. We still have a sneaky tasting menu to do.
Yeah. So I think that so the Friday night game, right? Louisville and Georgia Tech go Friday night. I am unclear about whether I'm going to be vestedly interested in this game. I think that I might be.
I am vested up for this game.
Louisville?
Actually, neither. I am vested up on the under in this game, which I grabbed at the number of 65 points. No, I'm just not sure like where 65 points are coming from. This has gone down to 64, but Louisville's offense did not look great a few weeks ago against Pitt. Pitt's defense is good, but looks a little less good than it did at the time. Malik Cunningham was hurt at the end of that game. He is supposed to play, but I'm just not entirely convinced that Louisville's offense will be operational to the level that they might want. And Georgia Tech has offensive issues. And also, like, Georgia Tech could miss 4 extra points, and that could contribute to the under. So I'm intrigued by the game as well, but I don't think there are going to be a ton of points, personally.
The 11 a.m. slate, Central Time, Florida and A&M, obviously interested on my end. LSU, Missouri, I kind of want to tune into that to sort of rubberneck it because I think that Missouri team is really, really bad.
Missouri plus 14.5 over here.
No chance.
I actually don't know if I
have not taken that.
I think so. Here's my take about Missouri. I agree with you, Richard. They may very well be going 0-10. Here's why we like them as a vested interest team this year. And I am 2-0 betting on Missouri games this year. One with the under.
You like them
because their run defense is really good. Okay, not really good, but good, even for the SEC. They have some really good interior linemen. Nick Bolton is a Butkus Award candidate, one of the better linebackers in the country. Bama ran for like less than a yard a carry in the fourth quarter of that game against Mizzou. Tennessee ran for like 2.5 yards a carry in the fourth quarter. These games were both over by that point, but Mizzou won the fourth quarter against Bama by like 10 points. So I think that Mizzou, if the values are right, which is obviously how we have to approach this all the time, could be a team that covers some spreads, a quote-unquote great teams cover team that goes 0-10 but is like, I don't know, 7-3 against the spread. Just putting it out there as a possibility.
Sure. Texas Tech and Iowa State. Your boy, Purdy, right?
Yeah, I mean, let's watch and see if Iowa State is like trending good or trending bad. And
that's 2:30 Central Time.
That's at 2:30 God's time. Yeah, I'm intrigued by that. I'm intrigued by Texas State at Troy, which we've talked about Texas State previously. Troy? I'm not sure I'm trusting Troy at more than a touchdown of point spread as the favorite. I always trust Troy kind of on a physiological level, but maybe not gambling this week. I'm intrigued by, and we've talked about BYU. I'm a little intrigued to see how UTSA does at BYU, and I'm vested on that at UTSA plus 34. I think BYU is great. Obviously, this is not going to be a close game, but if UTSA could hang and it could be like 14 or 21 or even anything inside like 28, be a pretty good show for a program that may be turning a little bit of a corner. We will see.
Tennessee and Georgia also at 2:30. Arkansas and Auburn at 3 p.m. I'm just interested in both those games.
Sure.
For reasons we talked about Tennessee and Georgia. Auburn. How does Auburn respond? How does Auburn come back after that game? And Arkansas. Is this a letdown special for Arkansas? Has Arkansas actually taken a step forward? Or is what we saw Saturday night legitimately a mirage? Also in that window, Middle Tennessee and FIU. That, for me, is a vested interest because I cannot, for the life of me, figure out why Middle is just a 3.5-point underdog in this game. My generated spread is 9. Man,
I'm gonna have to talk to you about that one once we get off the show. That's an intriguing proposition. Although I see as I look up that it's already moved to 4, so it seems like you were a smart man to get it at 3.5. In the evening, I have a vested interest in a good Lord, this is not going to be good game at 6 p.m. God's time, East Carolina at USF. We have talked about East Carolina.
So you're vested in that, or you're just interested?
I am vested in USF minus 4. Yeah, I mean, Richard, didn't you win money betting on ULM or something recently?
I think so.
So I'm just saying, if you can do it on ULM, I can certainly do it on USF. They are not very good, but the line has moved in my favor since I got it at 4. It's 4.5. USF is really bad. I have nothing to say for myself. I just did it, and we're just gonna see. We're just gonna see how it goes.
Just gonna roll with it.
Keep an eye on that game during commercials from the game that you are more likely going to be watching in that slot, which is 7 or 6:30 God's time. Miami at Clemson.
Temple and Navy at 5. Florida State and Notre Dame at 6:30. Holy.
Oh, and how can we forget?
I think.
Before, Alabama at Ole Miss at 5 God's time on ESPN.
Yes.
That is interesting to me because we are going to probably get a definitive answer to how bitter Nick Saban is about Lane Kiffin's performance during the 2016 playoff. It would not shock me in the slightest if Nick personally holds Bama not winning that championship against him. I was going to take Ole Miss in this game, but I just can't do it because I think Saban might try to win by 50. Thoughts?
I think that Ole Miss legitimately can have some joy in the seams on offense.
Okay.
I think that Alabama can be got at there, that part of the field. That is where A&M had some joy, and I do mean some, against Alabama. I think Ole Miss can make a little hay there at 5 p.m. Central Time on Saturday. Florida State and Notre Dame is just – that may be a rubbernecker. I think Notre Dame might really put the hammer down in that game because I think Notre Dame is really, really good this year, honestly, and legitimately. Last, I may have Marshall vested interest against Western Kentucky because I think Marshall's a pretty good football team. I really do.
I am vested in the final game of the night. We have another week without a real late game here at 7 p.m. Gods on ESPNU, Charlotte at North Texas. I got North Texas as a 3-point underdog at home in this game. That is where it has stayed, so you could get it too. I think very highly of Charlotte's upside. I think Will Healy is a very strong coach. I think that this is like a good program, but I don't get, like, this feels like very much a toss-up to me. Like, I'm not sure there's a ton of difference at this point between these teams. North Texas can't defend, but they can score. And if you have what seems like a toss-up, I would just take the home team and the points. So North Texas +3 is a vested for me in this game. And I think that LSU-Mizzou actually may have been moved to later in the night, so you can go to sleep with that if you so choose.
And also physically moved
to
Columbia, right?
It physically moved to Columbia, yes. Which, if you previously vested on that game, probably means that your bet was canceled and you'll have to bet again at the new line.
Interesting. All right, plugs on the way out. You can find me, RJ_Wrights, on Twitter. Mondays, SEC Network, Moon Crew, newsletter, this podcast. I think I'm on Pro Football Focus's podcast this week. I'm on like 2 other podcasts this week.
You are all over the place. Wow.
Yeah, what can I
like
say?
A defensive back in a
January.
well-schemed defense. You can find me most of the places, though not all of them, that Richard just mentioned, but anywhere around the Moon Crew orbit, I will also be there, and on Twitter at Alex_Kirshner. Thank you for bearing with my false start. That's a 5 podcast penalty for me. For attempting
rate, subscribe, rate, subscribe.
Hey, rate, review.
Well, I guess
all of it, all of it.
Rate, review, subscribe.
We really do appreciate it.
Rate, review, subscribe. There we go.
We really appreciate it. The way that this podcast will succeed in the long run, and we believe that it will, is frankly just if people continue to subscribe to it, download it in large numbers. We really appreciate that and your support. Richard, talk to you on Sunday.
Pay my bills, Zaddy. See you next week.